Stench soup.
I was swiping through TikTok when I came across a video of a man claiming to be from the future. His accent was odd and he talked quickly as if trying not to lose his thought mid-sentence. The content of the video itself was interesting enough. Hi, my name is Julian Eldridge and this message has been brought back for you by Dr. Weston Granville, who we're going to meet in just about 30 years' time. A pause followed while someone on the crew gave him a confused look and then cut. No explanation or credits. It ended abruptly after less than 20 seconds. Hold on. What the hell? That's my name. I shouted out loud. I clicked on his profile to see what other videos were uploaded and discovered that they all had the same pattern. There would be no information at first except some bizarre monologue about how things work where he's come from, before being interrupted and the clip ending suddenly with nothing more to go on. It took me a good 2 hours of watching them, but I eventually caught up to where I needed to be in the video series. What follows is the entirety of one particular episode. This is my message, sent back in time by Dr. Granville himself. This isn't a prank like so many others floating around these days. If anything, you'll find it much stranger than most. He spoke rapidly into the camera now. This place looks very different. Almost every square inch seems to have been modified for human habitation and the rest. Julian paused briefly here, his brow furrowing as he appeared to struggle over what words to use next. After a few moments, he seemed satisfied with whatever thought was bothering him. For fun, he finished lamely. A shot of a building appeared on screen, its facade entirely blackened. Its windows were painted completely white save for several which glowed faintly. This building looked strangely like the one I was in right now, tall and thin and 6 stories high. Julian returned after a long moment of silence, continuing his narration without warning. This is Dr. Granville's former residence. A single room inside served both as living quarters and lab space. That may sound cramped to you, but consider the circumstances under which this person lived. His face became somber then, almost mournful. The entire town has become a ghetto-esque war zone, filled with rampant poverty and despair. People are forced to live outside on the streets with nothing more than a blanket and a bag of water they've paid dearly to get each day. The government controls all food distribution and forces them into slave labor by having them work in fields owned by the state in exchange for scraps of bread that barely feed them or keep them alive. He went silent again for what felt like ages before returning once more. We don't have much time left, so I won't go into much detail about our world's history other than to say there is an absolute, unending war being waged against us from within our own borders. Our country is known as America, and it is led by one man whose name will not be spoken aloud because he is too dangerous to be named. He is responsible for nearly every bad thing that ever happened to this planet since the beginning of time, and you can only hope his reign ends soon. There was a brief pause followed by a loud thump as the camera jolted upward at a sudden angle while the audio picked up Julian shouting something incoherent. "My God! They're here!" I had no idea what was going on and kept watching in horror when suddenly I heard another voice in the background. "Julian, are you okay?" There were sounds of someone walking through the house as well. What's happening? More voices joined in, coming closer. "Are you hurt? Julian, where are you? Julian." Julian shouted out, his voice breaking. "They found me. It's a trap." And then the screen turned black. That was it. Nothing else came after those words, nor any explanation to who these people might be. I watched it again and again, hoping to hear more, but never did. Instead, I began to notice tiny changes throughout the video. After a few minutes, I realized that there seemed to be 2 different versions of him running around in that same room. Both of them sounded almost identical, but there was definitely a slight difference in their tone. Once or twice I caught myself thinking that this wasn't exactly Julian Eldridge's voice either, even though it obviously belonged to him. He'd said as much himself just moments before. The realization shook my mind awake as in a dream. This really couldn't be real, could it? No matter how many times I rewound and played back the footage, the details kept changing so that all I knew for sure was the last minute and a half of the video, with everything else vague and indistinct until the final line was spoken. My thoughts immediately jumped back to the beginning, where he claimed that we're going to meet in just about 30 years' time. Was he telling us that this world had already been destroyed by war? Or had the year changed? And why was his message being sent now? What had happened? And then my phone rang and all of my problems vanished instantly as I jumped to answer it almost before looking at the display. Hey Weston, how are you? I'm good, thanks. Sorry, who's this? It's Julian. There was an odd pause before his voice returned. I know what you must be feeling right now. W. I took a deep breath. This guy was still using his name despite not knowing anything about me. He didn't know me well enough to use my nickname. No, that wasn't quite right. What do you mean? I asked, trying to sound nonchalant. I felt sick to my stomach over the implications of our conversation and struggled to keep the panic out of my voice. I know you've stumbled upon my videos, he answered, seeming unsurprised by the question. His tone sounded somehow apologetic. It's okay if you want to hang up. I'll understand. No, I replied quickly. Why don't we meet? He suggested, a smile in his tone. I could hear a few others talking in the background, their voices hushed. What for? I questioned in return. My heart beat so hard it hurt, but there was nothing more I could think of to say. Why would he want to talk to me? What was this about? Because it's important, came his reply. Can you come here as soon as possible? I have something to show you. He hung up without waiting for an answer. I looked around the room again, feeling like I had lost my mind and had only dreamed all of those things just minutes before. The first thing that caught my attention was my bag on the floor beside the bed. It lay open and its contents had been scattered all across the ground with no rhyme or reason. The most startling item inside was a piece of paper which was lying face down with several words written on one side. What is this? I asked myself aloud, picking it up and reading. We need your help. They were Julian's exact words from earlier, along with an address. A house in Elk Grove Village, 711N. Elizabeth Street, apartment 6. I didn't know what to expect when I arrived at his place. A dozen strangers maybe, but the door opened to reveal him standing alone in the hallway with his hands folded behind his back. Hi, he said, smiling wider now that I was within earshot. He seemed almost happy to see me. Hi, I replied quietly. Sorry if this seems weird. You're not in trouble, he reassured me after a brief pause. It's good you came. I walked past him into the apartment, taking a quick glance at everything while trying to maintain eye contact. Can you tell me why we're meeting? I asked finally as we sat down together on the couch. We'd never met before and it felt odd being so close so quickly, but it wasn't like we had much of a choice. He stared right back at me without saying anything for a long time, then suddenly smiled again. I guess it would be easier to show you, he eventually answered. Do you mind if I borrow something of yours for just a second? Before I could say yes or no, he reached over and grabbed my phone from my hand. It took him less than 10 seconds to unlock its screen before handing it back with a grin. All right, are you ready? For what exactly? I asked, watching his fingers twiddle around my device. To go home. His tone was calm now, as though that should have been obvious. I'm confused. You'll see soon enough. And with that, he pressed a button on the side of my phone. It turned black and began to vibrate violently, sending vibrations through my hands until they became painful. My eyes went wide in confusion as the sensation increased, and I tried to reach out to stop him, but there was nothing I could do. Then came a strange clicking sound and an immediate pressure against my ear, followed by another burst of vibration that shook me completely loose from the world I knew into some other realm where I couldn't feel anything at all. And then it ended. Leave a comment if you'd like to hear part 2.